Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Brothers of the Arcana. As always, I am Alex Aldea.
I am Dave Ferrigno, and today's guest we have Mark Stowfish.
And thank you, sir, for joining us, Mark. We'll do a very quick intro of who Mark is for those that may not know. 35 years experience in comparative religion, philosophy, psychology, and mysticism. Director of studies at the Institute of Hermetic Studies. Tons of articles, tons of contributions to traditional Western esotericism in general. I have read with great delight Egregores. I have many questions on it. One which you may not necessarily want to answer because you didn't answer it in the book. But I'd be very curious as to really what we were talking about there. So thank you so much, Mark, for being on the show. Really do appreciate it. We had some folks on the show previously that you may know. Tim Hogan was on the show earlier. He was in our 4th episode, as well as who else did we have, Dave? We had a whole bunch of folks.
Oh, we've had quite a few. I mean,
Scott Walter.
Whether Scott Walter or some lesser known individuals, but certainly very interesting individuals like Brian Bowden, as an example.
He's Bigfoot in all things paranormal. So very, very interesting.
Is he the fellow from Pittsburgh?
No, he's a Jersey guy. He's a member of a lodge here in Jersey, and he's down in Florida. But he's all over the place. Does like every con known to man in terms of like anything having to do with Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. We had this interesting debate because he said that Loch Ness Monster and Ogopogo are actually the same monster. He's got tunnels that he goes under the earth from one thing to the other. Go, hang on a second. I'm more likely to believe there is a Loch Ness Monster rather than like he summers in Canada and winters in Scotland. But you don't know. You just don't know what's going on with stuff. But I want to give them their due. You were on Coast to Coast, so clearly you're into a particular crowd, right? So there's some interesting. I'm surprised you don't have a show on Gaia. That's actually pretty surprising to me. Is that something you may not be interested in, or
we've not discussed it? Yeah,
I
know what's involved. So
let's start off strong, if you don't mind. So, which esoteric bodies that you may have been in, or that you know of, because obviously you probably know about pretty much all of them. Which one are worth a damn? Like if you're if people are interested in getting into, I always think of Masonry as sort of like the clearinghouse of folks, men specifically, who are interested in esoteric things, and then there's shootouts from there that go all over. There's some within the Masonic umbrella, and then a bunch of them outside. So if you were to say, hey, you want to become an adept, you want to become an esotericist par excellence, what would be the path?
Yeah, and that's the problem in Western esotericism, is that we have not done a very good job of maintaining tradition. And we have not done a very good job of basically getting along with each other. and quite frankly, you can't be an adept if you can't get along with each other.
True.
I mean, historically, we can look at these groups and say that none of them, and that's a broad statement because maybe there's quite some that have on an individual that we don't know about, but when we look at the history, the public history, a lot of these folks were not really on an inner initiation beyond Netzach.
Mm-hmm.
Because they couldn't socialize well.
So how are they?
This is an important point to make, okay?
Sure.
Because not every group has to be perfect. Not every group has to have an adept in charge. That's unrealistic. It really is unrealistic. What is realistic is that you understand when you go there where the teachings came from, how you are to perform them, what results you can expect. Now, with that, there is an expectation that we have what's called the teacher. Mm-hmm. And the teacher or teachers are important because they are a living expression or embodiment of how contact with the inner world, particularly we'll say, hopefully the inner essence, one's pure nature, one's enlightened self to some degree, is manifest or dealt with or managed in day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to have a variety of different expressions to it. So we shouldn't think it's always going to be just very easily identifiable. However, the capacity to get along well with others is a benchmark of it.
Sure.
This is really important. So when we look at different organizations too, what we find is that many of them have a different emphasis. And that emphasis then tends to cloud people's perspective of them, because we've had this statement for the longest time called the Western esoteric tradition.
Ooh. Sounds serious.
The singular Western esoteric tradition, singular. Right. And this is kind of an outgrowth in many ways of the singularity of monotheism, just attached to esotericism. And we see it mostly in Golden Dawn schools and those associated with it, Dion Fortune and all of that. And there's no such thing as the Western esoteric tradition. There's traditions. There's probably, I think Antoine Faivre said, there's probably 10 hallmarks or benchmarks of these different traditions. So when you look at them, they can often be very different. The problem here then is that we find people going into traditions or methods of practice that rarely cover all the bases. And that's something we try to do at the Institute for Hermetic Studies. You know, when you look at practices, you have really what's called an exoteric practice or an outer practice, which is really the social and ethical training that you have in religion. Now, this is problematic because as we enter into the post-Christian era, it then means it's increasingly difficult to have people within the exoteric tradition and a lot of the morons in esotericism. And did I say morons?
You did.
You did.
Let's say it a
absolutely
third
did.
time, because we want to get that through. They're probably not trainable. Because how do you move from an exoteric tradition that you don't like into an esoteric tradition that fundamentally uses its symbols and myths? Yeah, don't do that well.
Hang on a second. So you're saying that the esoteric traditions fundamentally use the symbols and the mythology of the exoteric? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we see that all across Scottish Rite Freemasonry.
Okay.
We see that all across El Kohen. We see that all across Golden Dawn and Martinism.
Okay.
So
now, how does that manifest, in other words?
Well, therein lies the rub. You know, if you were gone to Sunday school and church, and you had learned some basic things to do and not to do and how not to screw up your life better, and decided you want to have a life of prayer, you know, you might go on very well. And then you might have what we move into, which is the real first initiatic, or what we'll call esoteric phase, which is religious mysticism. Now, religious mysticism is very well known to a lot of us, particularly in this area, because everybody knows some Italian lady who prays to Padre Pio and hands out holy oil, right? No,
Sure.
we got them all over.
Absolutely.
The place. You know them, right? You got a traffic ticket, you need to go away, you get down the street to that babushka, because that's where, you know, and one of these old ladies is worth, 10 or 100 of some of these folks that we got in esotericism. And I mean that in all seriousness, because of the severity and the sincerity and the focus of their devotion. Their religious mysticism. That's the second phase. Now, you see that expressed in what they call in the yogas the bhakti yoga, yogas of devotion. Okay? Now, the next phase is when you've moved from that experience of devotion, that I-thou relationship. In the beginning, it's I-thou, where there's God is all the way up there, deity's up there, and I'm here, and that's the outer. And then there's I, thou, where God is here and I'm here, and we occasionally meet on the level, and we have some communication. We have like a friendship develop. Then inner transformation, the third form or the second level of esoteric instruction, is initiatic. And that's where we start going through what we talk, these different levels of the spheres and different levels of transformation and different challenges, intense challenges that occur. And those challenges are very real.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talk, and that's one of the things that is not really well discussed in many of these groups anymore, except in passing, is what is this virtues and vices of the path. People forget that. Yeah, you guys are shaking your heads. Oh, yeah, that's right. They're on the tree, aren't they? Virtues and vices. Yeah. What does that mean? Virtues are the powers that are awakened within you as you overcome the vices, which are the obstacles that keep you from experiencing these wider, more encompassing, more expressive states of consciousness. And not just consciousness, but also action. Because the consciousness doesn't stay in some abstract notion. It's embodied in action. So, and then we move from that, we move away from this heavily symbolic methods, which is what we see in most of the initiatic systems, and naturally so, by the way. It's just the nature of it. As we get more and more integrated, we can move into what we will call direct experience of the numinous, direct experience of the totality of being. Jean Dubuis wrote an essay or a manual, so to speak, on that, called the Contact or Experience of Eternity, which uses astrology and talismans to hopefully ignite that experience during the summer solstice. But we see that expressed extensively in the writings of Jacob Boehme. And of course, as you know, Boehme was a profound literary and spiritual influence on San Martin, and to some degree, in theory, should also have been an influence on Martinism and other, even Rosicrucian groups. So you see that movement, these progressive stages of movement of the individual. So when you join an esoteric group now, what you're kind of doing is you're kind of skipping the first part. Most of them don't have and you're skipping the second part, and you're trying to jump into that third part, which is the initiatic transformative part.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't had good training, you're going to spend a lot of time in what, I hate the phrase the outer court, but you're going to spend a lot of time on the porch, so to speak, trying to play catch up for what you should have learned in the first one, which is your Sunday school teachings and basic philosophy and basic theology, basic do's and don'ts. And then also the second phase, which is how to have devotion, how to really have devotion. Now, most people have some of that, by the way, because that's what drives them to it. If you didn't have some inner awakening or inner experience, you wouldn't be moving in that direction to begin with. But I'm just trying to give this in a broad sense so people understand when they look at why do I end up joining 6 different groups? Well, it's because no one of them really has the complete package. I mean, that I'm aware of. There might be someone out there, but it's you're trying to find how do you move me through this initiatic process, and how do I move myself through it into that direct experience.
So you said within, obviously, the Western esoteric tradition, there are about 10 different paths. So you've got, what, Freemasonry, would you consider that one of them?
Not really, but I will for the sake of discussion. And the only reason I say that is Freemasonry is such an oddity. I remember this discussion years ago, even with Christopher McIntosh and Jocelyn Godwin and Antoine Favre, and a few others you would know, even Houteran and Graf. We're all kind of sitting around this table in Italy, right? And the question was, is Masonry an initiatic or is it an esoteric system? And the general answer is no. It's an initiatic system.
Certainly.
But it's not necessarily esoteric, because we know many brethren who they have no interest whatsoever on any interior, remember, esoteric is interior understanding or expression of what goes on. Even in Scottish Rite, we see that, unfortunately. Less so, by the way, but we do see it occasionally.
So we'll put that one to the side. Rosicrucianism.
Yeah, and that depends. Rosicrucianism as a whole, because there's so many different expressions of it, is definitely esoteric.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. But there's so many expressions of it, it's which one. I would say, you're asking about groups which are of importance. The thing about a group that's really critical is that it gives you some mental training, that you learn how to understand and discipline your own mind. Okay? Because without that, everything falls apart. Everything. So when we look at what is the training, and this is where some groups fall flat because they spend a lot of time having you memorize symbols and tarot cards and learn how to do geomancy or astrology, and these things are fine, but you need to have strong mental training of the ability to relax and concentrate. And in fact, here's where Masonry is really the great gateway. The several liberal arts and sciences. You spent time doing the Trivium and Quadrivium, and you'll really be very well prepared for a lot of this interior work.
Okay. So yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, so I know in your books you've really emphasized the importance of exercises like lucid dreaming, meditation, prayer. So would you say training your mind would be really geared towards, that with somebody's spiritual journey, that meditation, the lucid dreaming, prayer, or are you referring to other instances?
Well, the fundamental ability to concentrate is the foundation of all success in life. One of the greatest problems that we have now is that technology is destructive to the process of concentration and mental capacity.
Is it ever?
Well,
so many distractions.
Well, it's really problematic because it's counter-initiatic. From an esoteric perspective, it borders on, I'll say the word, Luciferian.
Okay, say more.
Demiurgic. How's that one? We'll use a safe word, demiurgic.
Demiurgic is not a safe word, Mark. Pineapple is.
Yes, exactly. And we could go Luciferian if you want.
Well, and the reason I say that is because what you just said, distraction, the capacity for distraction. In order to undertake these practices, you have to be able to focus your mind. And from that, begin to understand how your mind functions. You are not your mind. Your mind is a mechanism of consciousness somehow that exists, that processes information. And you need to understand how that processes information so that when you enter into these interior experiences, and some of them which are not just subjective but also objective psychic dimensions, that you can function properly in them. So concentration is the key to that, but that's the key to success in anything we do. If you learn how to concentrate, you'll be successful in anything.
Okay. Martinism.
Oh, it's a wonderful school. Or schools. There's so many different Martinist groups. I think the problem that we discussed with Martinism is that it proliferated so quickly in the early years and didn't have a standard set of teachings, but rather a curriculum that heptad or lodge masters had and then would fill out themselves, that it took on sometimes different groups or lodges took on unique characteristics. Hence we have Martinist groups that are Masonic only. We have not too many of them, but there's a few out there. We have other Martinist groups that are they're co-ed, but they have some nuances to them. But generally speaking, and some of them have more elaborate rituals, like we can see in the Blitz monitor. The monitor written by Edward Blitz in, what was that, the 1890s in the United States. I think Papou referred to that as, this is how Americans do lodges, because it was such an elaborate ritual compared to the more simple rituals, if you will, that were done in Europe. I know many people who've said that, they don't have the kind of lodge work that we do here, that their lodges, their Martinist lodges in Italy and France are much smaller. I mean, you do them often in someone's house. which is not common, because if you go to Massachusetts and you go to that wonderful Sturbridge Village, or Old Sturbridge Village, the 18th century village that they have rebuilt up there, you have a spectacular Masonic lodge on the second floor in the ballroom. It's all painted on the ceiling because the governor's house was, of course, the wealthiest house in the area, and so they would have met there, just as they would at times have met in taverns or above taverns, if it were, in masonry.
Okay. Golden Dawn.
Golden Dawns. I think they have many interesting and wonderful sets of methods that have proliferated and been tremendously influential in a lot of organizations, a lot of groups. The only issue that we would say with the Golden Dawn is that, and people get upset with me when I say this, but it doesn't really have a strong philosophical foundation.
Because Crowley didn't have a strong philosophical foundation, I suppose.
Well, the Golden Dawn was pre-Crowley, but what happened with the Golden Dawn is that you had the split, of course, and then you had some lodges which kind of survived under Moynihan Mathers, and it reformed as its own Rosicrucian order, the Alpha and Omega. And then you had Dion Fortune's group, which was a Golden Dawnish group. And then you have Paul Foster Case, and of course he was horrified of Enochian, so he takes all the Enochian out and does all this really crazy obsessive, compulsive study of gematria. Crazy making gematria to an extreme. And all of this kind of works. Some of these lodges survive, some of them don't. And then Regardie, he comes along in the 30s and publishes the Stella Matutina material, which we call the Golden Dawn. And the idea was, as he said, that, he didn't see a lot of people doing it, and this was to preserve it. And, of course, he gets in big trouble because some people are really happy he did it. Some people aren't. It's kind of like Masonry. You know who's buying all those Masonic monitors in the 18th and 19th centuries? Freemasons. They were buying them all because it made it easier to study the rituals, and they make their own annotations in them. That's what we would have done. We would have bought the monitor. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that's great. Easier than reading this cipher,
I suppose. Yeah. We won't get too far into that because obviously we're not supposed to discuss stuff that happens in lodges and
we're not discussing what happens in lodges. We're discussing history and how we walk around it. So, and then so you see the same thing with the Golden Dawn, and then as the Golden Dawn slowly revives in the 60s and 70s, and I mean slowly, 60s, 70s, and 80s, you have the group in Australia, which was the last surviving really functional Golden Dawn lodge for the longest time, which Zaleskis were a part of. And they have a very different view. Like when you talk to Pat, he has a very different view on things because he had what we'll call oral teachings, which was experiential instruction from the lodge masters, from the class masters, if you want to call them that, who had been there for decades. And they had dozens of people who had earned their 5 = 6 and beyond. Okay? Now, when people were starting lodges, which was fine, they're grabbing Regardie's book, and that's all they've got. And there's a lot of stuff that's missing in there. And when I say missing, it's functional information that you can either only get from an operative lodge or from someone who's worked through it. So now what happens? Well, it's like what happens with all these things. You try to find a way to plug the gaps. So someone says, well, we need more information on the energetic body, so we're going to pull in yoga, because Crowley did yoga. Someone else says, we need more information on the energetic body, so we're going to pull in Qi Kung, because Regardie pulled on the golden flower to elaborate on
or Kundalini, or whatever you want. Right.
And then what you end up with is the systems are non-organic. They're not syncretic. They're syncretic, but they're not organic. So you end up with a lot of people using these terms and words that come from a variety of different systems and may have a variety of different meanings even within the system. And things get very concretized very quickly. And when they get concretized, they can get, I don't like the word dogmatic, but they can get rigid. And then the whole system gets rigid. Because you don't have, like the way Regardie talks about doing the vowels, and not the vowels, the intonation, vibrating divine names. I know a lot of people who think that's like the only way it's to be done. I know people who 3 or 4 different ways, which are even far superior to that method. But because it's not written down, then you have that argument, and then we see this in histories of all sorts. Because something isn't written down, well, that's not the way it was done.
So let me ask you this: have you ever read Mark Rothfuss's book, The Name of the Wind?
No, I've never heard of it.
So it's a fantasy book. It's supposed to be a trilogy. He only wrote 2 books out of it. The idea being that a mage was immured in a room made predominantly of stone. He was supposed to be imprisoned there forever, but he knew the secret word of stone, the secret name of stone. And when he spoke it, the stone had to obey, and it opened and allowed him. I've been fascinated by that idea ever since, because it says 2 things there. So if you're using high ceremonial magic, right, and you do the circle properly, even if you have no idea what you're doing, you have no intention to do anything other than just to draw the circle, it should function in and of itself objectively, outside of your intention that you would layer on top of it, right or wrong?
Right or wrong? Yes.
Perfect.
No.
Moving on.
That's the exact answer we were looking for.
As Paracelsus, but even Agrippa said, a ritual done poorly but with the proper attitude, and I paraphrase here, is more effective than a ritual done well without the proper attitude, and that attitude is faith. When we say faith, we mean conviction, confidence. And then confidence is born out of 2 things. One is experience or dramatic necessity.
I guess being locked up in a room is dramatic necessity.
Now, that said, the magic circle is a conscious realization of our presence in this world. And it's a conscious realization of our own energetic dimension, what we could call our own middle pillar. Really what you're doing is if you're doing a ritual circle properly, it is an actual expansion of what we'll call that middle pillar, that central channel.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. It's not as if you do the circle and then you have the channel here. That's the way you're often taught, and that's the way people think. But going back to those levels that I talked about, in reality it would be. Now, if that happens, if you do that, you won't have that capacity from experience and time, then you have reached the point where ritual work is not essential. I knew many people like that. Their mental training was so significant that they never really did ritual at all.
So the ritual is a vehicle to developing that level of mental capacity, let's call it. And once you have it, the ritual is just a vehicle, right? So it's not
if you're instructed properly, that is correct. If you're not instructed properly, the ritual becomes an end in and of itself.
Mm.
And then the organization or the group becomes an end in and of itself. And then that's what we talk about in egregores, where you don't really graduate. You never get to the real inner transformation, and you never really get to that point of direct experience of the numinous, of the one, whatever we're going to call it, of your deep inner self, your full actualization of your capacity. Because you're always being held back by this notion that, I've got to do it at the right astrological time. really, we say we face the quarters, but as Dubuis used to say, whichever direction you face is east when you're an adept.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah. And I have to say, I've been very fortunate in my life to have met a few.
Are you one?
That's never a question you answer. Because who's to say? I can just say that I've met some really, truly talented and gifted people. And their gifts were demonstrative of a level of knowledge of the forces of nature that were stunning. Even my great uncle, who I grew up next to and learned a great deal from, and he was involved with AMWORK from the 20s, from 27 on, and his father was a Braucher. Not your run-of-the-mill one either. He was learned in what now it's Poland, then it was Eastern Germany, Silesia. The functional ritual work of the 6th and 7th books of Moses, which is a part of the Faustian or the Black Books of Magic from that period. And they were, quite stunning, the capacity of that work. But, my great uncle, of course, I remember they would say, and you meet the guy. I mean, the thing that impresses people most is not the fact that he is said to have brought his niece back from the edge of death. Quite literally, the death certificate was filled out. They're waiting to put the time in.
Wow.
But that they said the real sign of his mastery of the forces of nature is that I said, well, he fell off the roof the second time when he was 86.
Wow.
See, the second time. See, I
The
guess
second time at 86.
Yeah. The first time was when he was 73.
Jeez. What was he, a cat burglar?
But I think, I said, the ladder is broke his fall a little bit with a slide, but
You'd think he'd have mastery of gravity by then.
Well, yeah, pretty close. But, his capacity was good. I remember many times, it was really funny. My brother was, of course, delivering Domino's Pizza in college, right? And he drives his car up. He's getting a new order. He doesn't think anything about it. He just walks right from the car into the store, gets the order, turns around, leaves his car. Is gone. Someone stole his car.
Oh, man.
Okay. So he tells our great uncle about it, and he says, "Oh, hold on." And he goes in, and I have the papers here somewhere, and he makes these dots, geomancy, and then he says, and I even have the little blue circle that he would use for concentration, right? To use the dots. Boom, there it is. He goes, they'll find it. Don't worry. So 2 days later, they find it on the the Central Scranton Express route, now known as the Joe Biden's Expressway, and of course it's out of gas, and they stole his cassettes, So,
oh, man.
But he was an accomplished astrologer as well. But those things. It's the first part that I tell you is tremendous capacity, and Dubuis, of course, had tremendous capacity as well, and several others who are not well known. If not well known at all. It all comes down, when I look at what the commonality between them was, it was what I said earlier about mental training, concentration.
Okay, so moving on to just cover these 10 before we move on. Alchemy.
Alchemy is a spectacular path. Of course, plant work is not. We call it alchemy, but technically it's not. Alchemy is technically working with
metals.
Yeah, minerals. Yeah. And there are some people who take it in a very materialistic way, and that's understandable because you're dealing with the forces of nature and natural magic to create this feedback loop, this relationship that the transformation on the metal takes place. It creates a force field, which causes a transformation in your own energetic makeup. That then creates a feedback loop. Boom, 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 boom. Mm-hmm. And,
okay.
And the thing is, if achieved, the stone, of course, needs to be multiplied. And at a certain point in that multiplication process, the individual, of course, their method of transformation or transmutation is very simple. It's almost like a form of natural magic, if you will. It's very indistinguishable from anything. You wouldn't even notice it if you didn't know what to look for.
Interesting.
So we covered high magic with the circle conversation. There's probably more to be said than that, but Kabbalah.
Yeah, in Kabbalah, there's different Kabbalahs, right? There's different schools of Kabbalah. And we're mostly working with Lurianic Kabbalah, the tree of the Lurianic tree. Again, many people think of that in very concrete terms, as if that's the only tree. There are other variations of it, just as there are variations of the symbolic associations on the paths. We have this story that is often told, again, courtesy of Dion Fortune, that those were blinds for the uninitiated. No, they weren't. They were just different ways of experiencing reality. And same thing with the color codes in the Golden Dawn. I mean, that's Moina Mather's color palette. That was what she had in her pencil box. They don't match. The elemental colors don't match what Paracelsus said. I trust Paracelsus sooner than I would Moina Mathers. And she was quite accomplished. It's just that that's what she had available at the time when they're, hey, I got to draw this and fill this in, and then suddenly you don't think that 70, 80, 100 years later people are going to be dogmatic about this. I mean, remember, that's the only place we see 4 colors, 4 worlds, 4 colors. We don't see it before then. And there are color schemes for the spheres that are very different. Does that mean they're wrong? No, it means that's a different way of perceiving reality and guiding you in a different direction. Because each sphere is a world in and of itself. Each one of those spheres on the tree is its own complete cult, its own complete method of worship, if you wanted to work it that way.
Interesting. And you could work each in turn or each in part.
Remember, a tree in each sphere. So that means a world in each sphere. Each one is its own microcosm.
Theosophy.
Wow, which theosophy? Again.
Well, the Rorish one or the Blavatsky one, is that the same?
I think that Blavatsky did a tremendous amount of benefit to us with theosophy. I find that Alice Bailey kind of drives me crazy.
I tried to read Glamour. I don't get it. It's so weirdly confusing, and she talks in circles, kind of thing, and I didn't get it.
Well, what we see with Alice Bailey is, again, and it's coming out of the mid-war period between World War I and World War II, and there is this idea of just everything is represented in this great cosmic bureaucracy. I don't even want to call it a hierarchy. It's more like a bureaucracy. Do we see that in Kabbalah? Of course we do. Do we see that in Vajrayana? Of course we do. Do we see it in Indian Tantra? Sure. Chinese Taoism, magical Taoism? Sure. It's just that this theoretical, abstract bureaucracy which she presents is, I find, an interesting idea, but utterly useless on any practical level.
Ooh.
Now, with Roerich, we have this kind of... And I like Roerich in a strange way. We have this kind of fascination, this idealization with Tibet, and we see an idealization. And remember, he was there when it was really raw and rugged,
I just love what Krishnamurti did to them, though. I thought that was hilarious, with the whole Order of the Star thing.
Oh yeah, everyone's 50,000 people or something like that are gathered, or at great expense, and he says, "Oh, I'm not your teacher." And he walks away.
Well, he goes, "My first order is to dissolve the order."
Yeah.
He's like, "I have nothing to teach you people. Move about your business."
I I think Roerich has some interesting things to say, and his focus on Shambhala is an important part of the general mythos, the various apocalyptic mythos that exist within Western esotericism, Tibetan Buddhism, and maybe a few other systems as well. And that mythos gains a great deal of gravity in the 20th century, in the post-war period. Because if you really have to wrap your head around this, and this is very difficult now for people to do. You really have to wrap your head around what people experienced. And this is why you see so much just blatant misinformation and false information about Julius Evola and traditionalism. As a kid, I experienced people who went through World War One.
Sure.
Influenza. 20% of the world's population died in the influenza. When my grandmother was a child, they were piling caskets up on her father's porch. Okay?
Yeah.
World War One did not end with military victory. It ended, which is critical to understand how World War II then comes about in many ways. It ended because they couldn't field armies. There was so many men were sick. Okay. So you have this coupled with the horrific collapse of the empires, the Bolshevik Revolution, and all that goes with that. We're still suffering from the side effects of that, and in particular the Bolshevik, the Soviet period in Eastern Europe, particularly in the Ukraine. They killed more people with starvation in 2 years than the final solution did with full mechanization.
That was under Khrushchev.
No, that was under Stalin, Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin initiated the destruction. He was in the 1930s. He initiated the destruction of many of these things. So you have this moving forward. Then you have World War II, and this is so horrific. And how does it end? It ends in massive destruction in Europe. It ends in 2 atomic bombs being dropped in Japan, and this realization that we can destroy ourselves. So as the things are moving forward into the 50s, a lot of these esoteric groups are getting involved superficially in what we'll call peace movements. Now, I say superficially, I mean they're advocating for, and rightly so, a more peaceful world and disarmament. Now, I advocate for that all the time. But then what you...
No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
Because without it, what are we going to do? We're going to end up having a real mess on our hands. But the devil's always in the details on how you do this.
We'll get to the devil, Mark, not to worry.
Yeah. So what we do then is we see these groups moving forward, and they're changing and morphing. And theosophy, particularly Balian theosophy, is probably the one we can zero in on the most for the strong advocate of what we'll call one world government, one world religion. And they really are. I mean, that's what they advocated. But you see that as a subtle point across many of these groups. Sometimes it's more blatant. Sometimes it's more suggestive. I mean, it's not there in every one of them. But there's the fundamental notion that there is an invisible hierarchy, the unknown superiors, the Mahatmas, the Bodhisattvas, the Rishis, and that our job is the saints, the body of Christ, and our job is to attune ourselves with them and their will and their efforts to bring peace and harmony to the world. And of course, this is a wonderful thing. There's no problem with that. But the question is, how do you know that what you're talking to, or that what your spiritual teacher, or whatever you've decided it to be as your spiritual teacher, is either really talking to one of these folks or understands it correctly? And that's where we get into a lot of mischief.
Okay, so what did I miss in terms of the 10 paths so far that we haven't covered?
I wasn't counting.
Fair enough.
We have a lot of mystical paths too. Again, like Jacob Bima, Emanuel Swedenborg. These visionary
Is that the
paths.
Swedish rite, Swedenborgian rite?
Yeah, well, Swedenborgian rite comes out of Swedenborg. Yeah, Swedenborg was a great visionary, mystic. The north, I forget what this technical name was. They call him like the northern mystic or something like that. And but again, his visions are fascinating because he had predicted so much that was verified, and yet his cosmological structure is radically different from other cosmological structures that we later see.
So here's my sort of the rub with some of this stuff. I was at a all-you-can-eat rib fest the other day, as you do when you're a Mason, and I saw a gentleman there, happens to be one. He had an interesting necklace on. I said, "Oh, is that a Golden Dawn necklace?" No, he said, "It's OTO." And I said, "Oh, why don't you have a seat?" And I tried on some level to sort of say, "Look, I'm not judging, but maybe the left-hand path is a possibility that can still get you to enlightenment. I don't know." And that's a question that I'd love to talk over with you. We'd love to talk over with you, obviously. Just can you go down that path and still get to where you should end up?
Well, it always depends on what do we even mean by the left-hand path. The left-hand path has two really distinct meanings. The one is what we often come across in Western magical groups, again, coming out of Dion Fortune mostly, and then, of course, from the Golden Dawn earlier, but Dion Fortune seems to be the one where we come into this a great deal. And Crowley talks about it as well, in which the left-hand path is seen as a path of evil, a path of darkness.
Right.
And these are the brethren of the shadows, the Black Brotherhood, as opposed to the White Brotherhood or the Great White Brotherhood, which would be the unknown superiors, superior incognito. So, if we look at it in that kind of very distinct way, we would say that no, the left-hand path cannot bring you at least to enlightenment as long as you're on it, because at some point you're going to have to reconcile things that are not reconcilable as an active participant in it. It's that's a very, again, kind of, there's a pretty strong dualism there. Okay. And, can you be a good, can you be a saint and a drug dealer at the same time?
It's a good question.
I can think of some ways where it might be possible but probably not. I can think of some, it's easier to be a good prostitute and a saint than it is to be that, So, because there's at least examples of it. Now, the other definition of the left-hand path has to deal with those things which are forbidden and transforming them. So it's a kind of personal alchemy. And that's different. And there, in the Indian Tantras, you deal with the 5 M's. Okay. So this would be, let me get it straight, sex, alcohol, meat. Oh, 2 others. There's 2 other things. Just skip them at the moment. But you deal with these things which are generally forbidden.
Gambling, maybe? Something like that.
No. And the reason being is, there's things, again, you have to look at the paths, as I said earlier. The outer path The exoteric path, which most people follow in a religious way, is a path of negation. Don't do this. Well, the reason you don't do this is because you don't know what to do, and you're screwing your life up. So don't do this. I mean, think about it. We have to tell people, don't murder. We got to write that in stone. Don't murder. Don't steal other people's stuff.
And they murder anyway.
Right. Yeah. Don't have sex with their wife. Okay? So, we have these 10 commandments. That's an outer path. Now, an inner path is when you try to do good things. So in Buddhism, that would be the Mahayana path. And that's the path of, you think, compassion. But that's really an abused word. But we'll say that's where Jesus says, love ye one another. Mm-hmm. Okay. Jesus says, and this was wonderfully clear. Thank you so much. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Well, a lot of people treat you really poorly. How are you supposed to manage that? You see, now that's what happens. As you're being compassionate and as you're being nice, as you're trying to do well for the world, you realize that there's some pretty crappy people out there, I think, as Jesus found when he got abandoned by his followers and crucified.
Well, that's where the turning the other cheek comes in.
Well, yeah, but as my uncle used to say, you only have two cheeks. Which leads us to the third path, which is the path of transformation. Mm-hmm. How do you manage these incredibly negative situations? How do you deal with incredibly negative and destructive and violent people? Because if, teddy bears and hugs was all it took, we'd already have utopia.
Exactly.
So this is where the initiatic transformation comes in, and now you're dealing with things that people often don't understand. And that's where you're dealing with, again, those things which are forbidden, because you have to be able to manage those things which are forbidden within yourself in order to be able to manage them or assist other people in managing them.
So maybe that's a good... I was going to say, that's probably a good segue then into the process of shadow work and confronting the darker parts of ourselves. And, how would you relate and correlate that to, what we're just discussing?
Well, shadow work is overused. It's an abused term. We go back to what I said earlier. There's virtues and vices.
Okay.
What are your vices? Stop with the shadow nonsense. Shadows. You know what? What you've got is desires and urges.
Oh, yeah.
And you're selfish and petty. Okay, now let's deal with this. Why are you selfish and petty? How can you not be selfish and petty?
It's mostly fear towards the other, right? I mean, that's really where we're going.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is say, how do we understand where this comes from and how to manage it so not be managed by it? How do you manage violence so that you're not managed by it?
Right.
So how do you manage aspirations and hopes and goals and not be managed by them so that you become so obsessed with achievement that you forget about all other accomplishments or necessity? So that you become simply obsessed with yourself and not understanding what you're doing to others along the way.
But as a normal human being walks the earth, right, they have X amount of ability to control the stuff that happens in and around them. It's mostly what they can do from their piece. They really don't have any control of what happens to them, for the most part. They can react to it, they can try to plan for it, and that's kind of where it ends. An adept walking through the world, does he or she have control over what happens to them?
They have more control.
Okay.
But they also only have, because they have more control over themselves.
So as inside, so outside, as above, so below, right? So the more you, right.
if you look at your life, you have control over about 2 to 3 hours a day of your life.
Okay.
You
Fair.
just do the math. Just do the
Right.
math. You sleep for 8 hours roughly. You work for 8 hours. Then you have another hour getting to and from work and whatever may happen in between. So that's 10 hours. Now we're at 18 hours. You're going to have to probably, maybe you have to take care of yourself a little bit. So you might go to the gym. You might shower. Let's hope you do. You have to run some errands. So now we're at 20 hours. So maybe if you're really lucky, you might have as many as 4 hours a day that you have to yourself.
Okay.
So you have to learn to maximize your capacity to be in the world but not of it.
True.
Because that's what you have to learn to maximize. How to be in the world but not of it. So that when these things happen, they don't overwhelm you. And that's where mental training comes in. So that you... And it's very fundamental. It's basic. It's not that you're repressing things. You're simply not reacting to things. See, there's action and reaction. Or should we say there's reaction and choice. And someone who is very skillful at something, we'll say makes the choice. Driving would be a good example. You see people with road rage and stuff. What's that all about?
Plenty of that in New Jersey.
Yeah, I was at an intersection today in a fairly slow. I was surprised all these cars reached it at the same time because it's fairly rural, and lady behind me is banging on the horn. It's like, wait a minute, this is a stop sign. They have the stop sign. Car in front of me goes. Car across goes. Then I go. That's the order. Yeah, that's the order.
At least it's supposed to be.
Right. But what I do is, whatever. I tell my kids, whatever, let them yell. Let them yell, let them honk, let them do. That's not you. You're not responsible for them. You're only responsible for you being a good driver and a safe driver. That's all that matters. So, but that's the way with everything in our life. And as you're more capable of controlling and taking control of your life and having more influence in your sphere, your magical circle of influence, which is your life, then you're able to have greater influence in the magical circle or sphere of others. And that grows and grows. But that's not without consequences. You have karmic tendencies. Karma we'll call habits, for lack of a better term. Habituated patterns. Attachments. Okay? Well, as you overcome your karmas, your habits, your patterns, your reactions rather than thoughts, and you become better at it, you then have the capacity maybe to help others. Well, as you're dealing with this, then maybe they don't want to have their hard karma overcome. That's where we talk about taking on the karma of others. Whenever you go to help someone, you're in a sense taking on their karma because you have to deal, and this is just straightforward psychology, it's something magical about it. You have to deal with all of their habituated patterns and thought processes, emotional reactions. But those are deeply connected to energetic patterns in the psychic dimension. That's when it gets metaphysical. So it's deeply connected to the energetic qualities within their psychic structures. And that's when that transformation takes place. That's when it can become very difficult for people.
Okay, so
That's where illnesses arise. That's where you see illnesses arising.
Let me try to understand something. So I'm writing a book. Dave already knows this. I'm going to bore him a million times with the idea of how men can become better men through the use of sacred space. Using ritual as sort of like a workshop to unclog yourself or to decrystallize ego positions in the body. Ego positions, PTSD, anxiety, depression, stuff like that. So the idea is, what modalities work best for that kind of thing? Is it magic? Is it going to the gym? Is it? I mean, there's got to be some stuff that works better than other stuff, right? It's not just like, well, just pick your poison because they're all sort of whatever and they're all incomplete anyway.
People look at magic as a solution, and it's not.
Okay.
Ritual is not a solution to your problems. If anything, if you do the ritual right, it's going to bring your problems up. People go to magic because their life sucks. They want to change it. There's something they don't like about it. Well, you have to come face to face with what that is, what it is you don't like about yourself, and what you can change. And even if if your notion of yourself is correct, maybe it is correct. Maybe you do need to stop being a slack-jawed loser. Get out of bed, get up in the morning, make your bed, go do the best you can at what you do. Take a walk. Maybe you don't have to go to the gym every day, but you should walk for at least 15 to 30 minutes a day outside. Get some vitamin D, do some deep breathing. Okay. There's a lot of things. And then clean out your friend connection. More importantly than the rituals are meaningless if you don't have the right people doing it. The household of the faithful. If you've got good men and women doing the ritual, then you will have good ritual experiences on a psychic dimension. If you don't have good men doing it, meaning people are going to be petty and bickering or control and whatever, remember, as you do the ritual work, that's why these groups explode, is because they don't expect those habituated karmic patterns to arise. What a ritual does is it's what you want on steroids. You have a goal, an aspiration. Well, good. This is the steroid that you're injecting into that muscle mass to make it happen faster. That's what it's doing. This is the juice you're adding to the system. The ritual cannot do it in and of itself. But the ritual can do is amplify what you're attempting to do. And then as you have more people doing it, it amplifies even more. So you have the group habit patterns or the group karma, which is a terribly vague word, but the group habit patterns all coming up. And they all have to be managed and dealt with, so you have to prepare them for it.
So would we say that the group is the egregore then, in this case?
Yes, in a way it is. It's you're developing kind of a group egregore at some point. Yeah, a group consciousness. Yeah, group awareness. But of course, it's not very aware. It's all happening on an unconscious level. You think we're just getting there to have some fun and have a ritual, and we're going to prove ourselves, and then suddenly everything goes to shit. You say, why'd it go to shit? Well, because you didn't know where it was. The rituals brought it out. It said, this is the problem in your life. This is the problem in your life. And now the results of the ritual have given you an opportunity to address that. But instead it's, he did something wrong, or he did something, she did something wrong, or no. And then there's going to be the obstacles that arise. You're going to want to do this, and suddenly, out of nowhere, there's going to be that phone call. Oh, help me with this. Oh, I got a flat tire. Oh, this happened. All these obstacles will arise out of nowhere that you're going to have to overcome. Well, this is where you put your big boy pants on, and you're either going to be on the path of the hero, which is what it's traditionally called, or you're going to say no.
And if you say no, what happens?
Well, you stay where you're at.
Hmm.
The opportunity may not arise again. Now it might. Maybe next week the group will meet, and you'll get to meet then. But at some point, you're going to be the person who can't be relied upon, because as soon as something comes up, you don't show up.
So would you say those hardships or other challenges that individuals face is really important on that spiritual journey?
They are the spiritual journey.
Fair.
They are it. What? If it were meant to be easy, it wouldn't be called the great work.
Very true.
If it were meant to be easy, all of the adepts or the stories we hear about them would not have involved trials, tribulations, and even their own death.
Sure.
If it were meant to be easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
That's very true.
There's a lot of stuff that happens in some of these organizations, especially the newer ones, because I can't name, I mean, I can. I would prefer not to name names because some of these folks have died or things have happened that really it shocks these communities. There's one in Jersey that happened not too long ago. I believe whether it was a Luke Owen or whether it was Golden Dawn or OTO or whatever the case may be, of maybe they didn't have the right rituals in place. Maybe they summoned or did things that they had no knowledge of. I mean, you say you're a Luke Owen, you're supposed to be leading a priestly life potentially, but then you turn it into a cigar organization and don't take it seriously. Then what happens?
Well, and that's been my commentary about Masonry. We've turned it from the old boys club to the young boys club, where it's all cigars and bourbon instead of fish fries and chicken dinners.
Yep.
Okay.
There you
go. That's not really good for your channels, by the way.
Well, yeah.
Smoking. You're going to be
Smoking's not good for your channels?
Your psychic channels. You're going to be doing breathing exercises to increase your energy load, while at the same time you're ingesting variety. Well, cigarette smoking is worse, but.
Well, we do not inhale, and I defy you, sir. This is Mapacho. He is a trickster god.
Yeah, well, of course you can defy me. So that's what I said. Cigarette smoking is worse. That's the real one. But the nice thing is, at least with good pipe tobacco and good cigar tobacco, you can really, as you said, you don't inhale. But a lot of the things like vaping and stuff is just terrible for your lungs. Terrible.
I feel exactly the same as you say. Some of the stuff is it really is terrible. You make mention in your book, and this is the thing that I wanted to say.
Well, let me go back to El Cohen for you for this, because
sure.
This is important.
Yeah.
El Cohen was essentially, if you look at the rituals, and I just donated stacks of El Cohen rituals to the University of Scranton, which is a Jesuit university, to the Weinberg Library as part of the Institute for Hermetic Studies collection. And so we're going to be putting probably about 1,000 volumes, including lessons and letters and things, in that collection.
Wow.
Now, if you look at the rituals properly, you notice that most of them are exorcisms of some sort. And the principal ritual that is so important, which we've talked about variations of it, is, of course, the equinox ritual, and this is the equinox, which is for rebalancing the psychic energies of the earth. Or at least cleansing it. It's kind of a temporary cleansing, a temporary mop-up, if you can, even if it's just for a second or a gigasecond. So, the El Cohen, in some ways, one friend of mine who said to me, who was in it, in Europe, in Italy. He said they were really, if you look at them, they're like these state exorcists. In some respects. That's one way to look at them. And before the folks go off on me, about history, just kind of use this as a metaphor to understand it, okay? If any of you have ever been involved in real exorcisms, okay, or experienced any of that, you recognize that one, mental training is essential so that you don't lose the plot. And the other is that when the church, and El Cohen is essentially Roman Catholic.
Okay,
if you look at the rituals, it's essentially Roman Catholic. It's a form of Roman Catholic magic. Okay? Then the person who is picked to be the diocesan exorcist is the one who really is someone who you can look to. I don't want to say a saintly, but let's just use that word. Who has certain higher qualifications of what we'll call saintliness or interpersonal purity. And purity, we'll say, is they've got a handle on themselves. They've got a handle on themselves. Okay.
And assuming you don't do that, obviously you open yourself up to all kinds of nonsense.
Right, because as within, so without. If you haven't exercised or integrated those what we'll call extreme qualities. I don't want to call them demonic, but we'll say extreme forces. I mean, what are the demonic forces? Let's look at their let's look at their characteristics.
Gluttony, lust.
Right. So they're really very selfish. They're self-oriented. They're very powerful. So we have a lot of life force. Okay. But we don't have a lot of compassion. There's no love there. Okay. They don't connect well. They don't play well with others. Now remember, that goes back to what I said about groups. Successful group, you need to play well with others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So they don't play well with others. They're very self-focused, self-directed. There can be limited amounts of wisdom, light. Well, we call them darkness, which means they don't have a lot of light. Now, they may be intelligent in the sense, or smart out, but there's not wisdom. There's an intelligence factor, a perception factor, but not wisdom. Because wisdom is, of course... So what you have is something that essentially is very powerful and has some very focused capacity in which to direct that. And if you haven't really dealt with that in yourself, your own, and we'll say in those vices, your own gluttony, your own lust, your own vanity and pride. Pride is the worst one, because that's what cuts us off from everyone else. Your own anger, destructive power, your own sloth. Okay. And even we could say...
I've always wanted my own sloth.
What was that?
I've always wanted my own sloth.
I know. That and probably a capybara.
Yeah. It's largent in the Rodentia family. It's true.
I've been told many times I can't have one. My wife insists I can't have one.
Oh.
And I am not allowed. And I'm not allowed to have a what is it? A raccoon, because I can't have anything that's smarter than I am.
Is that what your wife tells you?
That's right. Hey, they have hands, okay? You ever see the videos? If it can open the drawers, it's no.
It's in there summoning something.
Yeah. And then the other one is lies. Remember, what we see with with arrogance and personal pride comes a lot of deception. So that's where we see a lot of people on the path really come to a struggling point when it comes to, we'll talk about, say, the initiatic process of Hood on the Tree of Life. They really struggle to get past that. And if you look at the paths, well, of course, all of them coming off it, none of them are pleasant. Hanged Man, Hell, Blasted Tower. It takes a lot of effort and courage to say, I'm going to keep going and overcome. And then we look at Jesus. Jesus, of course, was said to have been given 3 temptations in the desert. And I think that they roughly parallel those 3 temptations, or those 3 processes of that path, or those 3 paths leading to Tifereth.
You mentioned in your book that there was an esoteric order that you were a part of, where habitually the Grand Masters died of blood cancers.
That was not an organization I was a part of.
Oh,
an organization that people I know were a part of. And
can you talk about it?
Sure.
Or will you talk about it?
Sure. I think because it's in the book. The notion.
I think you failed to mention it in the book. I think you said something about you didn't necessarily say what it was. I was always curious as to what it was. Mostly stay away from it.
Yeah, I won't mention the name because it's not worth the aggravation.
Okay.
It's not. But the point
is it any of the ones we've covered so far, at least?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Is it any of the ones we've covered thus far?
No.
Okay.
And I'm not doing a technicality either. No.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay.
So it's a very niche thing then, I guess.
You would know it. You would know it as soon as I said the name, but it's a niche thing.
Fair enough.
Yeah. and I think it doesn't really matter because what was happening is you had groups of people who were sincere in their practice, sincere in their desire, and for whatever reason, the emphasis, as people told me, was on connecting with the egregore, connecting with it, because that's where the juice came from.
Mm.
And I find it fascinating because I'll give you a hint. Some of the practices were oriented towards continuity of consciousness. And that continuity of consciousness process indirectly has a lot of strong Saturnian qualities to it because you have to stabilize your locus of awareness. And I thought that's interesting because Saturnian, Saturn's tough. Tough. And that's why I thought it was fascinating that they were getting these same kind of, a lot of them were getting these same kind of odd diseases. I mean, blood is usually associated with Mars.
I would say, but the stagnation of it would be, right?
Yeah. Saturn, it's not functioning properly. The energies aren't purifying. And the function of Mars, at least when we think of Gebura, which is not Mars, but Mars is an extension of Gebura, is a reductionism. It's a removing of all that which is not essential.
Mm-hmm.
All that which is not essential is removed. That's its purpose. So that the plan, the process, whatever that happens to be of chesed, can take place, can manifest, can flow. But for us, we're going in the other direction. We're not going down the tree, we're going up. So anything which is unessential to us in order to open up more fully and completely to our inner capacity, our inner beingness on a really, truly profound level. Truly. This is where we're talking, they call it the sons of Jupiter, the heroes of Jupiter. This is the domain of the unknowns, the real unknown superiors, the real adepts. Okay, so when you connect, if it's to a genuine, not to your own inner self, which is fine, which is all you need to anyhow, but if you were to connect with Saint Germain or Kutumi or whoever they're, the Theosophical Society or the Amorc or even the Golden Dawn was talking about, that individualized personality with all of that potency would be on that state, if we want to call it that level of being, if we want to use that phrase. Right on the edge of non-being.
Right on the edge of non-being.
Yeah. Well,
is that where Babaji is, and like all these beings that sort of filter in and out of, not sentience, but in and out of materialism, so to speak?
Yeah, we would assume so. Because the next, but again, there's also, remember, we're using a particularly Western model here. I'd have to say, if we look at Babaji and we're looking at these guys, and we need to look at it in the framework of Tantra, we need to look at it by Vajrayana. They don't make these strong distinctions. We still have we have really strong dualism. Even when it's subtle, it's real strong. That runs through a lot of esotericism and a lot of these practices. And at that point, I got to tell you, I mean, it doesn't do any good. That's why they say it can't be communicated, because words don't work. I think that words don't necessarily, it's not that they don't work, it's just that you're trying to convey something. It's like talking, it's like talking algebra to a first grader, even a third grader, fourth grader. It's, why are you doing this?
When when I spoke with a buddy of mine about thinking about doing a path of non-duality, or moving into that sort of mindfulness thing, a lot of meditative, having a practice, he quoted me an area of the Bible where I think Jesus said, if your mind is full of all kinds of things and you have a demon in it, then you kick it out and you clear your mind of everything, you sweep the house nicely, and then that demon comes back and brings 50 of its friends because now it's got a lot more room in yourself to inhabit. And as being one of the things why you don't want to do mindfulness, because you have no ability to deal with any ingrown things or other things that may come in. The non-duality teacher, I asked him the question, and I said, quoted the thing, and he goes, he's absolutely right. If you have untreated trauma and you get rid of, and you start on your non-duality and you achieve the beginnings of enlightenment, let's call it, what you're really taking away is your ability to cope with the trauma. The trauma's not leaving, but all your coping mechanisms, all the fog, the stuff that's sort of keeping the trauma at bay goes, and now you're just left with naked trauma. And whatever else may be there. Thoughts?
Well, non-duality is just, it's hip now, it's overrated, because it's kind of like mindfulness. Mindfulness training is the first stage. It's about learning how to focus and pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good end in and of itself. But without it, you're lost. Because you're like a cat chasing a light. You know, it's just, you're all over the place. So you have to learn to relax and pay attention, to be mindful of what's happening within yourself and not be followed off on every thought or impulse that arises within your brain pan. You know, and that's what mindfulness helps you do. Now, once you've undergone a degree of training in mindfulness, then you begin to understand how the mind functions. You're not a master of it by any stretch, but you understand how it functions, and you begin to play with it a little bit and to manipulate it, which means you're able to now manage some of those stressful things. So within those systems, if you were to say go from mindfulness training, you might then also undertake some of the tantric training. And the tantric training is now creating these dramatic mini scenes in your mind. We call them sadhana, or practice. And they're complex visualizations and transformative states to help you understand that you are not you are not limited to this limited sense of self, but you can transform your sense of self. And that you can transform yourself, and what will happen now is all of those terrible things that you're afraid of and feel ashamed of and feel scared of will arise, and they will give you an opportunity to deal with them, to transform them. Now, the story of the exorcism of the possessed man in the gospel, and it says, "Who are you? Our name is Legion," and throws them into the pigs. That's in the Gospel of Mark, which is the shortest gospel and the first gospel, probably the oldest.
It's the oldest, right?
And the notion here, of course, is there's an endless array of distractions and possibilities. You know, one of the interesting things, too, is that when you encounter these forces, they rarely, I can't really say ever alone. It's always been a strange conglomeration. Like a singular body with many heads. Now, I'm just using that as an example. That's not really what it is, but it's like if you were to take a group of, it's like if you were to take 5 or 6 or 7 people, and all of them would speak to finish the sentence. Okay, that's kind of what you're dealing with. Now, so you want to go into enlightenment. What does enlightenment mean? It means to be able to know your fundamental nature and deal with life.
Mm-hmm. True.
So if you understand your fundamental nature and capacity and can deal with life, we can call you enlightened. If not, you run the risk of being simply detached from material reality. And that happens to a lot of mystics. That's part of the dualism thing. A lot of mystics just aren't capable of dealing with life as it is. So they may be able to see and perceive things. They may be able to channel some great visionary stuff, but I have to say, okay, what's this about? What can I do with it? Maybe that's just their function in this life. That's their capacity. They're meant to be this conduit for data.
Mm.
But then you need a framework. You need a social cultural framework that understands that. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning about the death of the churches. We're increasingly seeing a complete collapse of a social cultural framework. We have to rebuild a cultural framework, even if it's just through lodges and groups, that is what we would call traditional. That is, it has a connection to the transcendent. What we do can't be packaged away. Oh, I go to lodge tonight, or I go to the magical lodge, or I go to chapter tonight, or I go to Perneus tonight, or I go to Heptad tonight. And that then gets filtered away and shut off until you go home. Or that's my personal practice, that's like separate from my daily life. Well, it can't be.
Mm.
There's no way it can be. Otherwise, what will happen is you will, at some point, go crazy. Well, not totally, but you know what I'm saying. Neurotic. The neuroticism will build up because you're separating. You're going to have to make hard and difficult ethical choices. That's it. Welcome to the reality. Welcome to the path. And it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you.
What's going to
cost? How would it cost you?
Those choices. Look. If Socrates drank hemlock and Jesus gets crucified, if Cagliostro goes to the Inquisition, what makes you think you're going to walk away unscathed?
But maybe that's not the point, is it?
That is it. That is the point. You may walk away unscathed, but you have to be willing to accept the reality that it's probably not going to happen.
It gets into one of my favorite books, Illusions, The Misadventures of a Reluctant Messiah by Richard Bach. I don't know if you've read it, but it's a great one. Basically, the guy goes around fixing biplanes, and Richard Bach sees him, and he's doing all this stuff in a biplane that you're not supposed to be able to do, just gravitically impossible, gravitationally impossible. And he goes down and says, yeah, I'm a Messiah, I'm enlightened, I'm with this, I'm with that. He goes, oh, all right, that's interesting. He goes, why aren't you out there proselytizing? He goes, are you kidding? You know what happens to those guys? And then, it's like, I can't stick in a town too long because I say the wrong thing and people start getting ideas that I might be a Messiah. I got to move on. It's a very interesting concept. I mean, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it gets at... I mean, the Buddha made it out okay, didn't he?
Well, he died from rancid pork, and he had trouble with his brother. His brother was always giving him aggravation.
Sorry, my sister's always giving me aggravation.
There's a hint of irony there.
Yeah.
And of course, Buddha came from a culture that had acceptance of this. Okay, so you look at the difference. I mean, a lot of people like to compare Krishna and Christ. We see a lot of comparisons there, and I think it's a convenient one for devotional practices, but not in practice, in reality, because Krishna was accepted as what we'll say as an avatar, as a deity, as a god. They were expecting it. He's telling Arjuna, do your duty. Arjuna, I don't want to do my duty. He goes, do your duty. Buddha came from a royal family. He knew how to court royal patronage, which he was quite skillful at, despite being a monk.
Sure.
Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the Buddhist monastic system that we understand. So the cultural framework was supportive of that existence. Whereas you look at the cultural framework in the Middle East and in Europe in the classical period to the present. Um, Sometimes supportive, sometimes not. It all depended.
But you said yourself, you want to get to Tefroth, there is no way but through.
If you want to, whatever you want to achieve in life, no matter what it is, you've got to go through, and you've got to decide that you're willing to pay the price of what that is. That's it.
Can you talk a little bit about your path in terms of what is it that you're trying to resolve in this particular try on the karmic wheel?
Nothing in particular.
I'm not trying to buy it. I mean, in terms of you've done a lot of work to resolve nothing in particular.
Well, that's it. It's not the kind of thing. It's not the kind of thing you often make a decision about.
Okay.
And I think there's not enough time to really go into the critical points of change. Okay. When it begins, and it begins slowly, and the process of obligation is realized, you go down that path thinking that it's short term. And only later on do you realize this is for keeps. Because if you could see the whole path, what it would do to your life, you wouldn't take it. I mean, Jesus, again, he said, I don't want to do this. Can we put this cup elsewhere? I think we have to really focus on that. So one of the things that I've done is to reconnect many of the disparate pieces in esoteric practice.
But to what end?
Well, so that you can get from here to there instead of muddling about memorizing tarot cards and gematria for 40 years and not going anywhere.
Yeah, but the place you're going to, it sounds like a horrible way to go.
Well, at least, you may have a bumpy ride, but at least the view on the beach is fine.
True.
And
you mean after the Thelma and Louise ending, you end up on the beach somewhere?
Well, you look at the past. I mean, I'm not making this up. You guys know the tree. You just never really paid attention to it.
True.
It's
you're right on all counts.
Yeah, it's laid out for you on the tree of life.
Then how does the individual know if they're, genuinely progressing on the spiritual path, and if they're really on the right path? Then.
Well, that's a tough one, and I think that how you know if you're progressing in the beginning is often if things go to crap for a while.
Well, we're definitely on the path, Dave, because stuff's going to crap all over the place.
And then it's how you manage it. If you find yourself having more equanimity, kind of more relaxed in situations, you're not reactive, but able to act. You're able to sense the qualities of the sit in the moment and what it requires, rather than trying to respond in some formulaic or dogmatic pattern. Formulaic would be, well, this is the way we've done it because we've done it that way before. Dogmatic pattern would be, I always give to the homeless guy because that's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I've often said, well, I've worked with him and maybe it's not. I mean, if you're just giving money to his drug addiction, you're just helping him. Well, if that's his choice, well, okay. Understand, though, that you've facilitated that.
Right.
Maybe facilitate something better for him, something different. Really engage him as a person instead of just thinking right of yourself because you dropped $5 in his can. You know? So there's different ways. I just use as examples, how we can engage with things differently. You're also going to be more capable. You're going to be able to get things done. You're going to be more relaxed in many ways, and more focused. Because if you're not focused, you can't achieve anything. Now, we look at fellows like Paracelsus, who is said to have had the stone. And he was a bit of a, we would say, combative fellow. He had trouble getting along with folks. It's not always clear why that is or what that may have been from, but of course part of that was also cultural. As he said, I come from rough people. I am like the rough pines, a rough wood of pines. I am not smooth and polished like fine wood. That's a paraphrase, but that's essentially what. So you look at him, here's a guy who's traveled all over, experienced all these things. He's accumulated all this knowledge and wisdom, and he's often dealing with people far higher than him on the social ladder. So maybe that has a great deal to do with it as well. We don't know. I think that the best way is, if you want to know if you're progressing, then you have to look at your life as it is now, and you have to then reflect on your life as it was. And a good way is, how was it 12 years ago? And how was it 12 years before that, and 12 years before that? Like a Jupiter cycle is what we're saying.
Sure. So there would be probably periods of stagnation, maybe confusion when things are going to crap. How would you say an individual can kind of overcome that and get beyond that? Because I think maybe somebody might feel lost at that point spiritually. They might feel like they might not be progressing. So, what would you recommend to our listeners if that was the case?
Yeah, and the notion of progress is tricky because, again, we use these words, these terms like the path of return, the paths on the tree. It's almost as if we're, moving, as if we're, going to go to, it's Tuesday, this must be Belgium, Oh, it's Saturday, this must be Tiferet. Okay. We have to look at it more in terms of, are we more comfortable with ourselves and are we more comfortable with others? And how do we manage that? How do we manage those difficulties? This is particularly true, when things are of such a serious nature, like financially. And you're going to die. What is it you're expecting? Really, what is it you're expecting? Now, I know a lot of people who just continue to work when they don't need to. But they have to if they want to have the standard of living they've grown accustomed to. And that's the $70,000 truck. That's 2 or 3 concerts a year, 2 or 3 sporting events a year. That's the travel on vacation. That's the expensive vices.
Beach house, everything else, kids in school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
$10 cigars.
Got a couple of those.
Or 20, right? And remember, it's about volume here. We're talking about volume.
Well, I believe in what Erasmus said. If you have money, buy cigars, and if you have more, buy food.
Yeah. And what I say by that is, when you look at this, you look at where are you putting your resources and to what end. And when things get rough, that's life are telling us we need to reassess where we put our resources on a very basic day-to-day level. Now, that can still be very material, not necessarily spiritual as we would think of it, but how we respond to it is decides whether it's spiritual. And if we respond to it in the manner that says, you know what, I'm okay driving my 15-year-old used car. I'm okay with not having to take all these extra vacations or trips a year. I'm okay spending some time, taking time with my inner practice. And if that means having to cut back on these things, which I've grown very accustomed to, then that's what I have to do. And this is maybe, and maybe if it's not that, maybe if you don't have that kind of buffer, you don't have that kind of fat on the bone, but you really are, and there's another group of people that I know like this, they don't have that buffer. They don't have fat on the bone. How you deal with it is the same way, except it's even more stringent. Because now you may have to learn to cooperate. And I've had this discussion at Masonic events about membership, and I don't want to digress too much, but I said, look, you guys don't understand what a lot of these young guys are facing in terms of the economy. I know 4 people right now who, in order to rent a house, have to have 4 people living together at $800 a month each. That's the only way they can do it.
Sure.
Now, where I'm at, when I told some of the geezers that, rents were going for $1,400, they were shocked because they haven't looked at renting an apartment in 50 years.
Sure.
Right.
They don't know anyone who rents. And this is a tremendous impact that we have to look at. What is the value? And this goes across the board, whether it's Masonic involvement or whether it's Martinist, Rosicrucian, Golden Dawn, any of these groups. We have to make sure that the individuals involved are getting some value for their expansion of inner self and inner confidence, and that inner confidence can translate into actions that expand their capacity to have an impact on their own world.
Well, I mean, that should be a job. I mean, on some level, the idea of expansion of universal consciousness we're providing a public service, for God's sake.
Well, I don't know if there is such a thing as expansion of universal consciousness. I think we can become conscious of more universal things, but I don't know if the universal consciousness necessarily expands. And I think we have to, when we look at this notion of universal enlightenment, collective enlightenment, we have to be very careful. Not everyone's going to respond very well to it.
Okay. Why do you feel that way?
Well, just look at anything in life. People don't often respond very well to perceiving reality as it is. Why should it be easy for them because they're in the right place at the time when it took you 20 years or 30 years to deal with all this obstructions and mental and psychic scoria, and suddenly what? It just goes away? They get a free pass? Everyone can be very different, and if there's any such thing as karma, that is cause and effect, the fruit of our actions, then we are, as Eliphas Levi said, we are the sons of our deeds. We are self-created. That is the symbol of the scarab, the kephra. And I won't say it, but fully. But it says the kephra, the prayer is, "I am that which is self-created. I create it myself." And that's a symbol of the initiate. That scarab, that wing, that's a symbol. The initiate is a self-created being.
Why won't you say the whole thing? Is there a magical component to it that will activate it?
I'd like to get it right. It's kind of lengthy, and it's so repetitive. Like the words are very similar sounding. So,
in the Game of Life and How to Play It, Florence Scovel Shinn. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. Mm-hmm. So she said that there's an escape of the karmic out of the karmic cycle, and that's the path of grace. If you put, and to some extent, the Course in Miracles goes there. A lot of the work of Dr. David Hawkins, he does devotional non-duality, goes there, and it's sort of like hey guys, you're on the karmic path. That's your default. But if you jump up to this other path, the rules are different.
The rules don't change. You just understand them better.
Okay. But your actions change because you understand them better, right?
Your actions don't change. Your inner essence or your inner perspective and reasoning changes. Example. Mm-hmm. You make a donation to X cause. Now, you then want everyone to know that you made donation to X cause because that makes you look good.
Right.
It's good that you made the donation because it's needed and it's useful. But from a karmic perspective, we'll say, a little bit of more humility would have been helpful for you personally. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that lack of humility can come to the forefront because someone may see your plaque on the wall and talk to you about it, and they may get engaged. So it's not completely black or white.
Right.
And that thing may move forward, you see? So it's not just black or white. But in a devotional practice, which now you're talking about action, so we're talking about karma yoga. You do everything as an action for the deity and of the deity, which is your ideal. Everything is of and for the deity. So we see the great churches, the great cathedrals built as Notre Dame, to Our Lady. Mm-hmm. Whereas you see...
Or Sagrada Familia.
Yeah. So instead of having things with my name on it, you have the name of the ideal on it. This is the deity. This is the ideal, the virtue that you wish to inculcate in people. That this is a dedication to. So when you do things on behalf of the deity, and really you take on the deity, this is where we get into Assumption of the God form, and we get into other practices that are a little even apotheosis of oneself, but also a full inspiration that is an indwelling of deity in ourselves, a kind of possession.
Have you seen that?
Yes.
Oh.
So at that point, you don't have a karma.
Right.
Or, because it's not you doing it. It's kind of like there were men who were able to go to war, witness and do terrible things, and come back relatively unscathed. Relatively. Because they minimized the anger and the aggression in their heart and the fear. They were able to minimize it. There was some trust or confidence in something bigger than them.
Wow.
To protect them. And they're very rare. I've probably met 2 or 3 tops.
Luciferian.
I just say that because I use it as an extreme example because it helps us give us a point of meditation to begin to contemplate, what is it that creates karma? Karma is not just the action, but karma is the emotional attachment to the action. So if I'm really attached to what I've done or haven't done, which is that action, then that creates a force that moves forward that then must exhaust itself. We call that a karma.
Luciferianism versus Satanism, same thing, different?
No, they're different, and there's several different schools of thought here. Satanism, you got your, I got a soft spot in my heart for Anton LaVey. He was such a huckster. I mean, he was just such a carny, literally a carny. He was just great. But a strange kind of materialistic self-absorption, with him. Then you had break-offs from that, more focused on the reality, what they call the reality of the opposition, for lack of a better term. We see an increased, and there's some videos now on YouTube you can see. I haven't watched all of them, but I've seen promotions for a couple of them on the notion of evil within Kabbalah. And there is a rabbi who has he's just a spectacular fellow. He has a channel called Esoterica, and he has several really good videos you can watch on the origins of evil in Kabbalah. And again, we're going with a strong duality there, but it's important that we at least try to wrap our heads a little bit around it. There you're dealing with these forces. Again, are they an expression of deity itself? Because we have suggestions they are. We think of God as only good, but here we even have mentions in Scripture of I am the creator of good and evil. Mm-hmm. So how do we deal with evil is really how we deal with duality. How do we transcend it without avoiding it? Because you can't avoid it, and that's what we see with Krishna. Krishna's telling Arjuna, look, Arjuna, you were a king, you let your empire be stolen from you by your cousins, and they took your family. Now you've got to go back there and fight them. And he goes, but I can't kill them. He goes, well, you have to. They're criminals. He goes, but I have to kill my guru. His guru meaning his teacher in martial arts. He goes, He goes, you cannot kill that which is immortal. Now do your duty and get your country, get your kingdom back.
Now, what do you think that Krishna whispered to Arjuna?
He told him, he whispered to him, do your duty. Get out there and do it. Because the notion of moralizing, navel-gazing moralizing, is one of the big traps that we find ourselves in. And because we don't know what to do. We have an ideal, kind of a ethical or moral ideal. And it's not, and this is, remember, the path of purification. Don't do this. Don't do this. I want to be good. I want to be good. I'm trying to be good, but being good isn't working. I've only got two cheeks. Now what do I do? So how do I engage in this very aggressive, hostile world in which spirituality, another thing Levi said is the kingdom of heaven is taken by storm or force. And people they're horrified by this. But if you look at Taoism, the first thing you would encounter on a Taoist temple is you walk, the front of it is weapons. If you look at even in some of the Tibetan schools, the deities, the guardians are on the outside. We joke about the gargoyles on the cathedrals. Mm-hmm. There are hostile forces in this world, in this cosmos, that in our journey to realization, in our journey to godhood, if you want to call it that, we have to encounter and overcome successfully.
Dave, do you have any last questions for Mark?
Come back to me in a second.
So, Mark, you run the Institute of Hermetic Studies.
For Hermetic Studies.
I'm sorry, for Hermetic Studies.
I'll be some other guy. I don't want him.
Okay, fair enough. The Institute for Hermetic Studies. What do you want to say about it? Do you want to plug anything you guys have going on? Or?
We've been around for about 26, 7 years now, and we have online courses via Teachable, and we're going to be migrating them probably within the next 6 months over to a new website. So our old website is out of date and is not being updated until we launch the new one. But you can access our courses on Teachable, Institute for Hermetic Studies. We've got a great course coming up. It's called 415, or the 4 things you need to do for a minimum of 15 minutes each day for success in life. And
guaranteed?
Pretty much. Because I'll tell you, if you're doing them, your life's going to get better.
Okay, fair.
Okay? If you're not doing them, not much I can tell you. You know? Some things you have to do, okay? So we've got that coming up, 4:15. It's a great class. It's going to run for 6 weeks, 2 hours a week. And it's recorded too, so if by chance you want to take it but can't make the live session, that's okay. We've got a lot of other courses there as well that covers the entirety of the esoteric path from beginning to end, including some highly specialized material related to lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences in the body of light, because of course you know the book Between the Gates. And we also have twice monthly practice and sessions with questions and answers for students who are looking for some kind of, I don't want to say support, but community really. They want to get together twice a month and talk to their other people doing the same thing they're doing and get some questions answered in a meaningful way, rather than just posting something on Facebook and seeing who responds, right? Social media. And we also have our teacher training course, and those guys are going off on their own, and I encourage it. They have movie night once a week, or once a month. So they watch a movie, we go through it, find a good list, good movies with esoteric content, and watch them and discuss them. So we're looking at occulture, esoteric occulture in that regard too. So we've got a lot of things going on. And of course, we're doing our fundraiser for the Institute for Hermetic Studies collection, which, as I mentioned earlier, a collection of materials that we are working with the University of Scranton, their library, and holding and creating and developing. So.
Now, will you be digitizing that collection?
That's going to be a question to discuss with them. Some things will be digitized, some things won't. A lot of the stuff which I have here at my feet in banker's boxes is over 100 years old.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's going to get digitized.
I hope so.
We have a complete collection of philosophers of nature video presentations. Like if you go online to YouTube, you can maybe access 6 of them, and the audio is very poor. So we currently have someone who is taking them and is going to digitize them and clean up the audio so that you can listen to them. Now, someone does have them out there, and you can buy them. But again, we also have them they're up for free on YouTube, so we're going to make them available to the university, and the university can decide how to make them available as a digital archive.
How much does it cost to join the Institute?
It depends on which classes you take. We don't have, and this is an issue, sustainability is a financial issue. Make no bones about that. Up till now, we have not required an annual fee. So a lot of organizations, you pay $25, $50, $100 a year as a flat membership fee. We don't have that. We're doing our best to avoid it. Hopefully we can do that, but it all depends on how students respond to the course offerings and other things that we're doing.
Okay.
So you pay for the course, and then you have access to the course indefinitely. It's not just time limited.
That's
again,
pretty
so
amazing.
far, we're trying to avoid putting time limits on things because we're treating this like college level courses. Now there are programs of study laid out for you, and if you say I want to do the whole program of study, well, here's the courses that you have to take and take them in this order. Well, I just want to specialize. I just want like a 2-year degree instead of a 4 or 6. Okay, then what's your area that you like? Okay, then take these 5 or 6 classes. So it's really kind of we're treating them like adults and to be responsible for their own progress. But we have help along the way if they want it. But
it sounds like there's as you say, there's a certain amount of mentorship that goes along with it that can be accessed.
If they choose for the mentorship.
That's fantastic. Do they all work with you specifically, or with other people at the?
Well, with the questions and answer session, it's myself, and then we'll have guest people come on. But we have some wonderful classes that were done. You know, we had Jamie Paul Lamb did our classes on astrology. We had Dr. John White out from Pittsburgh. He did a wonderful class on New Thought. It was just off the charts, and stuff I was completely unaware of that I kind of thought I knew, but he really nailed it. He also gave a 2-hour presentation on Julius Evola and traditionalism. That's very, very popular. People like that one. What else? Oh, Ike Baker and Jamie and I did a 6-week class on the 3 books of occult philosophy. Agrippa's 3 books.
Interesting.
So we do our best to bring in qualified people, and yet at the same time not overwhelm students with information. The problem is we are awash in information. What do I do with it? How do I do it? In what order do I do it in? That's what we can answer for you.
That's amazing. And you've been able to codify this path, as you say, uniting these disparate pieces of the esoteric Western movement to have a beginning, middle, and an end, in essence?
Correct. And a lot of it's there. I mean, that's one of the things we talked about in the course on Agrippa. A lot of things are there, but what happens is these groups arise, and they get so narrowly focused that they have it, like they tend, it's, again, I don't want to be too hard on it, but my favorite one to bash, because everyone knows it so well, is, Builders of the Adytum, Paul Fauster Case. I mean, just this obsession with gematria and tarot symbolism. And then after 4 years, it's like, well, now what? Well, that was it.
Is the Builders movement, does that come out of OTO?
Builders of the Adytum comes out of the Golden Dawn, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Comes out of the Rosicrucian Order of the Alpha and the Omega, most likely. I think directly from Moina Mathers. I think that's how it goes.
And it's all just gematria, then, you say?
Well, they have rituals, they do, but there's an overabundance of emphasis on. And the problem with thinking that you've discovered the connective key to everything in the cosmos is that you then to see everything symbolically, and then to penetrate beyond that into the direct experience becomes nearly impossible.
Because you're stuck in the map.
Right. You're stuck in the map. The map, symbols are a good director or indicator, but they're not the road.
Right.
They're a terrible master.
Mark, Dave, have you discovered any questions in the meantime?
I have a whole list, but I was going to say, Mark, from one perspective, if you would say to the individual, the viewer out there, what piece of advice would you give them, like 30 seconds? Like, I think you were just alluding to, don't just stick with one realm, keep your mind open, expansion, because obviously there's always different answers and truths out there.
But you have to do something. You have to have a path which you can relate on, what you're going to default to. You have to make sure that you can default to a practice that is helpful to you every day and that is preparing you for death. If your practice is not preparing you for the continuity of consciousness and the awareness of death and what we think of, we talk about reincarnation and all of that, and what that means and how that process works according to traditional systems, then your path is not doing you the full justice that it could, because that is the direction, that is the end goal here, or not goal but destination. Mm-hmm. So you need to have a process that is preparing you psychically, and that takes a tremendous amount of effort, and that's not going to happen from massive memorization or collecting lineages. That's going to happen from very specific techniques.
So obviously there's different religious groups that might not believe in reincarnation necessarily. What would you say to that individual?
Do whatever you like. No,
As
Do
long as
whatever you like, folks.
do whatever you like. Mark, from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for the time, for the wisdom, for the humor, for everything that you've imparted to us. I'm sure that Dave and I leave a little bit wiser from this interaction. I for one, would be very interested in coming out to the Institute, or certainly signing up for the courses. So,
well, we have a free course on folding the rose. It's 6 weeks, worth of material. It's free. Just sign up for it. Take it at your leisure. And we have an annual conference in the beginning of June every year.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Love to join you for that.
Well, thank you again. Until next time, I am Alex Aldea.
Thank you.
I am Dave Ferrigno, and thank you again. God bless.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Mark.